All right, we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome everyone is joining us today. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today for a discussion on culture and branding. My name is Kevin Davis, and I proudly serve as the Director of Branding for Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Served in a number of capacities. Over the past 21 years in the fraternity, but over the past, I think five maybe or so, I've been in charge of marketing and branding for the organization, as well as publicity and engagement. So I'm super excited to be able to have my worlds join together with a fellow practitioner in the field, one of my frat brothers, Dr. Marcus Collins. And so I want to give you a little bit of information about who Dr. Collins is here. This is always the awkward part for the guests. They have to sit and listen to us kind of go through their bio. Well, we have to set the stage, and I do believe in giving folks their flowers and making sure folks have proper context on who they're hearing from. Let's see here. Make sure I mute folks. All right. So Dr. Marcus Collins is an award-winning marketer and cultural translator with one foot in the world of practice. Most recently serving as Chief Strategy Officer at Wieden & Kennedy in New York. He also keeps the other foot in academia as a marketing professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. His deep understanding of brand strategy and consumer behavior has helped him bridge the academic practitioner gap for blue chip companies and startups alike. He's a recipient of the Advertising Age's 40 Under 40 Award, Crane's Business 40 Under 40 Award, and recent inductee in American Advertising Federation Advertising Hall of Achievement. That's like a mouthful there. Most recently, he was recognized by Thinker 50 and Deloitte among their class of 2023 radar list of 30 thinkers with ideas most likely to shape the future. Before joining Wieden & Kennedy, he served as the Chief Consumer Connections Officer at Donor Advertising. And he also served as head of social engagement at Steve Stout's advertising agency Translation. Over the course of his career, he's developed a practice for creating culturally contagious ideas that inspire people to take action. His strategies and creative contributions have led to the launch of and success of Google's Real-Time technology, the Made in America Festival, the Brooklyn Nets, when they arrived into Brooklyn, State Farm's Cliff Paul campaign, and others. Prior to his advertising tenure, Marcus began his career in music and tech with the startup he co-founded. He also, his resume also features a few other small entities, such as iTunes and Nike Sport Music initiatives at Apple, and this kind of familiar lady named Beyonce. He's done a little bit of work for her. Hopefully she's successful one day. He's a proud native Detroiter and a fellow Detroit Public Schools alum, but he is a Phi Beta Sigma man, therefore more than a man, in the wise words of our founder, Leonard F. Morris. Welcome, Marcus. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Glad to be with you, my brother. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So let's just jump right into it. What started this whole conversation, we've talked about marketing and branding for years, and I followed your content on LinkedIn and all the other channels, but this right here is what kickstarted this whole conversation, which is Marcus's book. Just came out, was it in May?
May 2nd, yeah.
Came out in May. It's called For the Culture, the Power Behind What We Buy, What We Do, and What We Want to Be. And as an organization, over the last, since about 2017, Phi Beta Sigma has been very intent on improving its brand and understanding why we do the things we do inside our organization, why people want to join the organization, why people stay members in the organization, and so on and so forth. But I feel like the conversation has much longer legs beyond the fraternity. And so that's why we want to make sure that this conversation is open to the public today. It's nothing secret or proprietary we're going to talk about today, but this book, how has it been? How has the reactions, the responses been for you?
It's been a blessing, man. It's been awesome. In our first week, we did bestseller on Amazon, across categories, across new releases. The praise has been pretty great, from Wall Street Journal to like some of the giants in my field, from Rob Kosnet to Grant McCracken, Douglas Holt, and these are all on the academic side. And on the practicing side, on the advertising, marketing, communication side, just some of the biggest names in the field, from Morgan Flatley at McDonald's, to Lorraine Toohill, who is the global CMO at Google. It's just it's you put things in the world hoping that it finds a market and that people respond to it in kind to the spirit in which it was written, and to experience that, to realize that is both exciting, exhilarating, and humbling as well.
Does it feel surreal that your thoughts and your experiences are now front and center? They are open for critique, review, whatever. How does that feel? I've never had that type of pressure. So
I mean, it's it is pressure. I mean, it took me about 3 years from pitch to publish to get the book finished and in the world. So for 3 years, I've been sort of ruminating on these thoughts and, beating them up and interrogating them and deconstructing them and negotiating them and reconstructing them. So for it to go, I've been waiting for this thing to be in the world to hear what people think. And immediately when it launched, I was like, oh my goodness, like my entire life has just been sort of open wide. I just feel so vulnerable. And those things make me feel free, honestly. I feel like, there's not much that anyone could hold over me, because I've let it out in the world. And also it makes me feel very vulnerable, because my thinking, the way I see the world, sort of my thought process is no longer inside my head only in the way I cognate, but it's free for people to not only, interrogate, but to also build on top of. And I think that the academic part of me has built me up to that. Because academia, we this, you work in academia, we interrogate everything. I mean, down to the word. Like a word selection could be a 3-hour debate. So I feel like I was kind of built for that in a lot of ways.
yeah.
But to have it in the public square beyond just people who are entrenched in the knowledge, is a new space for me, but it's exciting.
What I will say is, I read through the book and, two things popped out. This is that moment of I found my people, where it's bridging traditional marketing, but it's the culture, it's the understanding of why people do the things they do that draws into these different brands, the purchase that we make, decisions that we decide upon. And then the other part was that I felt that this book not only was a great primer for anyone that's interested in marketing and in brand marketing, both beginners or folks that is interested, but also seasoned professionals. But the other part of it is I feel that this is a good history book of modern history, modern contemporary history. And it's the way that you wove in these experiences and the examples for the different brands. You learn a lot, there was a lot of political things you touched on in the book. Again, this is that vulnerability where you're drawing a line in the sand on this is who I am.
Yeah.
In the middle of everything that's going on. So again, kudos to putting it out there and speaking your truth. And I feel like that's something when you get a little gray hair, you feel a bit more comfortable doing.
Yeah.
Because you can pick your alliances a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I definitely cast my vote, so people know sort of where I stand on things in the world, where I sit in the world. And getting to the book was quite of a natural occurrence, because this, working in marketing communications, you always hear, let's get our idea out in the culture. What's happening in culture? Our ideas need to be informed by culture. Culture. But if you asked 5 people to define culture, you get 50 different answers. And that's a problem. It's a problem because without a clear Rosetta Stone to describe a thing, we become unable to actually leverage its power. And culture is unbelievably powerful because there is no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, full stop. And if we can't operationalize it, then we find ourselves unable to actually leverage its power. And that goes for whether you are a marketer, whether you're a leader, an entrepreneur, a manager, activist, a politician, clergy, or whatever the case may be, right? Because as marketers, our job is to get people to adopt behavior. Like that is our job. And I would argue, as I do argue in the book, that even if you don't have marketer in your title, you're probably trying to influence someone's behavior.
Yeah.
You're trying to, even if you're a student trying to get your professor to give you a certain grade, you're trying to influence them. Yeah, I'm trying to get my kids to eat their peas. They don't, right? And I'm trying to influence them. Like we're
Yeah.
always trying to influence people. And which means then, if we understand culture, then we have the biggest cheat code to do that very thing. So the book, it's not a marketing book, though I look at the world through the lens of marketing, because I am a marketer, particularly brand marketing. But really the book is about humanity. It's a people book.
Mhm.
So to your
Yeah.
point, there's a lot of historical reference, because to understand where we are and where we're going, we have to know where we started, right? How we got here. So the book does a lot of that. It tries to cover a lot of territory, but in a very, very, very specific way.
You mentioned culture, and as everyone probably knows by now, we're both members of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated,
sir.
and our motto is culture for service, service for humanity. And so that culture term is with us from the beginning,
That's right.
and it's the way we do things. Why do we do things? It is our why.
That's
And
right.
so my question to you, before we get into the book, but is what made you interested in Phi Beta Sigma?
Oh man, it's so there are a few things. I got introduced to Phi Beta Sigma at a young age. My brother joined our little brother organization, the Sigma Beta Club. And of course, I want to do everything my brother did, right? So I think I was the youngest Sigma Beta in Detroit at the time, 13 years old at the time. I joined the Sigma Beta Club. So in a lot of ways, according to the literature, I was interpolated into Phi Beta Sigma, right? Like I was acculturated.
Yep.
I was groomed to be a part of this. So I knew the brothers before I was a brother, right? And they were already big brothers to me. I'm thinking about Winston O'Neill, Bingo. Like, I've known Bingo since I was 12, and some of the brothers who were in the Sigma Beta Club became frat at the University of Michigan, where I went to undergrad, Delta Road chapter, particularly C.L. Phillips, Daniel West. They were both Sigma Beta Club members that I knew as a beta. And when I got to school as an undergrad, I said to myself, okay, like I want to make my own decisions. Yes, like I was in the beta club. I did all these things before, but I wanted to like really make my own decisions. I want to see what else is out there. I want to poke around. And what I felt was the most compelling thing about the frat was this idea of the inclusive we, not the exclusive we. I felt like all the other organizations, and nothing disparaging against them, I felt like there was a frame in which they operated, in which they were seen. And you were either one of them or you weren't, right? And to be one of them, you had to have a certain aesthetic. To be one of them, you had to have a certain way of life, way by which you sort of showed up in the world. And I was like, God, doesn't really feel like the best fit for me. But this idea of the inclusive we, not the exclusive we, meant that there is community here that makes up who we are. But these things aren't ways by which we create silos from us in the world. And I was like, that's really interesting. And when you take that perspective and look at culture for service and service for humanity, you go, I get it. This is an organization that's about community, that's about people. And as a community, they engage the community. And I was like,
Yeah.
those kind of people for me. And I didn't even understand the frat like that when I was a teenager. It took me coming into college and undergrad to come to that realization. I go, oh, this is the thing. And then I realized, without knowing, that my mom was a Zeta. My closest cousin was a Sigma at Kalamazoo, at Western Michigan. I was like, oh my goodness, like I was built to do this. I was meant to be here. And then, this is just serendipity, but my birthday is actually the founding date for our chapter at Delta Roll. It's like, okay, I'm supposed to be here. This
You sound like me. My birthday is our Founders Day.
It's Founders Day. I know.
Yeah.
That's why I never forget your
people are
birthday,
just
Kevin.
destined.
I never forget your birthday. I know it.
Yep. It's easy. It's easy to remember.
That's right.
But as I was texting you, I was reading a book and I was just thinking, I'm always looking at like applications of what I'm reading. And I was thinking about practical applications at work as we're thinking about culture and, half of my job is brand strategy. But then I was thinking about the fraternity and thinking about some of the frameworks that you shared. And one you talked about was like target demographic for customers, but then target congregation. And thinking about the founding of the fraternity where there was only 3 founders that evangelized, hey, we have something different here.
Mhm.
It's only a few of us, but we're going to find the other right few to grow this.
That's right.
And so I was thinking about, as I was going through the book, just how I saw the story of Phi Beta Sigma taking shape, thinking about the network of tribes and all of these different things. And it just made sense. Thinking about the competition that was around at that time, there were 3 other organizations
That's right.
around, but to come up and say, I have something different, but I'm going to find the right people that want to do this other way. And here we are, over 100 and was it 100 and what year is this? Almost 110 years
That's
later.
right. That's right.
So let's talk about your career real quick. Like, how did you know you wanted to go? What was that bridge from traditional marketing into this kind of brand and culture space? What kind of sparked your interest there?
It was a long and windy road, I'll tell you. I from Detroit, born and raised, did well in math and science. And
Mhm.
as it were, if you do well in math and science and you're Black, you're going to be an engineer. So that's why I studied. I went to school to study engineering because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Realized for my first year that I don't know if I want to be an engineer. I remember going back home and telling my mom, dad, it's like, I don't think engineering's for me. My mother's an academic. She goes, oh, wait till you get to your major, you'll love it. I go, okay. I trust my mom. So, okay, cool. I go back my second year. I didn't love it at all. I thought it was interesting. I just wasn't interested. And that distinction was very meaningful for me. Like I thought it was fascinating, the phenomenon of the things I was studying in material science engineering. I just didn't see myself doing it for the rest of my life. So I started taking some music theory courses to offset what was not a very good GPA. So I started taking some music theory courses because scholarship matters. So taking music theory courses, and I fell in love with major sevenths. I
Yeah.
was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a songwriter. So I went home and said, Mom and Dad, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be a songwriter. And they said, oh, you must be smoking crack because that ain't happening. You are not going to be a songwriter. What are you talking about? That wasn't even fathomable for them. So I finished my engineering degree at Michigan. When I graduated, I gave them my diploma, my degree, and said, I'm going into the music business. And I went out to be Babyface. I was not, but I tried my very best. Had some success, but not a ton. So I went back to school to get my MBA to understand this disruption that was happening in music that we call digital,
Yeah.
while coupling my love for music and this new skill set of business that I had been developing. And I figured marketing was the most creative discipline in business. And I figured if I can write songs in 4/4, then I could probably write an ad because in my mind, marketing was just advertising.
Yeah.
Clearly, a very myopic view of the world. So I get my MBA in Michigan. I go to work at Apple doing partner marketing at iTunes, managing our relationship with Nike Sports Music. And while I was there, or shortly after I left there, I met Matthew Knowles, who has a daughter named Beyonce. And he goes, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Let me get this straight. You're an engineer, you started a music company, you have an MBA, you worked at iTunes, and you're Black. Fam, you don't exist. You're not real. And I go, no, I'm totally real. And he says,
Yeah.
well, you should move to New York and run digital strategy for Beyonce. And I was like, I should totally do that. So this is like I am Sasha Fierce days, which is like a great time to be in the Beyonce business.
Yeah.
There's never a bad time. This is a
That
particularly
was a
good
good,
time
yeah.
because like you're seeing her go from Beyonce the artist to like Queen Bee. Like that's where we were.
Icon. Yeah.
Exactly. It was a beautiful time to be working with her and to kind of observe greatness. You know, like I saw it at an organization like Apple, but to see it in a human being is just completely different. It becomes
Yeah.
much more tangible that way. And it was amazing. And I learned so much. But I realized a few things. This is probably longer than you asked for, but I'm just thinking about this out loud. Um, I realized one, that Beyonce was super successful and I was benefiting from her success at that time. But I asked myself, was any of this had anything to do with me? Like, I didn't know if I was contributing to her awesomeness, right? If I looked in the mirror, I couldn't look at myself honestly and say, oh, this is successful because I've added this. And that was a problem for me. The second thing is I thought to myself, if I were to leave work with Beyonce, where would I go in the world of music? Like, everything felt like a step down. It just didn't feel
And you
computable.
jumped right in at the top. There's nowhere else to go.
That's right. That's right. It's like Lauryn Hill. You know, her first album is amazing. Like, it's hard to redo Miseducation, right?
Yeah.
So I go, oh man, I don't know where I'd go after this. And then I thought to myself, I was running digital social, and this is in 2009, 2010, pretty early in the space where people were using social networking platforms for commerce. And a lot of times I was the smartest person in the room in the context of music. And I knew that I was not the smartest person. And I go, man, I must be in the wrong rooms. Like, I'm like the valedictorian of the idiots. Like, this is not the right place to be. So I figured I was going to leave. And I thought I would go into advertising because they were doing a better job of leveraging these new technologies that we call social networking platforms. And they were breaking more artists in music than music labels were, the record labels were. You know, this is like Matt and Kim being broken in the world and feist by Apple. You've got Green Label Sound from Mountain Dew. I go, I'm going into advertising. Plus, Madman was popping in that time. And I was like, I
Yeah.
think I could do this. Like,
Good
Don Draper's kind
motivator.
of cool without the womanizing and the alcoholism. I was like, I could do this.
You strip all of that away. It's a
Yeah,
pretty
it's
admirable profession and character. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I go into advertising at this place called Big Fuel, pure play social media agency. And I'm learning social. Like, I'm like, it's like boot camp for social. And at this time, our biggest client was General Motors, and we had all of the social business for all their entire portfolio of brands. It was like a $25 million yearly retainer, just unbelievable. So I'm like right in the thick of it, at the bleeding edge of this industry. And I end up meeting a guy named Steve Stout. And Steve Stout was a long time successful music executive who went into advertising with his partners, Jay-Z and Jimmy Iovine, to start Translation. And he says, yo, I'm looking for someone who understands digital and social, who understands music, and who understands culture. And I've asked 3 people, and they've all referred me to you. And I go, I'll be a Huckleberry. I'm your guy. So I come over to Translation to build and run the social marketing department of the firm. And that was probably the biggest inflection point in my career. And I know people look at Apple and go, it's Apple, and oh, it's Beyonce, but it's Translation
Yeah.
that I would accredit like the biggest shift in everything that I've done, because it provided language that I didn't have before, like culture. Like, I didn't know what culture was. And not only that, I got to touch things that I had no business touching in my career. I mean, I launched the Made in America Music Festival there. It's like,
Yeah.
it's in its 11th year. Like, who puts things in the world that last for a decade plus? Doesn't happen very often. I moved a basketball franchise from New Jersey to Brooklyn. You know, I launched Cliff Paw for State Farm, right? Like, all these like massively commercial successes, but also cultural successes. And I learned how to do that at Translation. And that's what opened my eyes to the world of culture. That started studying the social sciences, realizing why we do what we do. And as my understanding of culture and the behavioral sciences got clearer, got sharper, my practice improved like hockey stick growth.
Yeah.
It is unbelievably unbelievably profound how better I got as a practitioner as I became more learned as a scholar.
But
And that's been the space I've occupied ever since. 1 foot in academia, 1 foot in practice.
what else will say is that from the outside, when you went to Translation, that's when I saw, I guess I could say it looked like Marcus was home.
Yeah.
You had found your space, and you were touching culture before we knew what culture was. It was, I'm trying to give the people what they want.
Yeah.
Now we can say that's, it was your understanding and working towards a cultural understanding. And but to get to that point, it also helps that you worked for someone who got it
Yeah.
and gave you the permission structure to be unapologetic about whatever the culture was and being true to it. And some you have to, kiss a few frogs before you find your prince. And as you're saying this, I'm just hearing there's a traditional route for every industry. And then you find out what your personal value proposition is. And you
Mhm.
can say, okay, I do this marketing thing, but I feel like there's a deeper connection with people. And sometimes you can be discouraged because you're not given that permission or the opportunity to go do that thing. And so you become discouraged. And to find the right organization that lets you be true, but to also be comfortable with yourself and knowing that I'm a bit of a unicorn, and that's okay that everybody doesn't understand it. I can
Yeah.
play wherever I need to play until I can try, gallop around. And I think that was just a huge turning point in your career. That's when I saw, I was like, Marcus is home. He's like the purveyor of cool now, connecting these big things that exist with a common sense approach.
Yeah.
And one thing, in your book, you talked about the debacle with Supreme and Farmland. And I think back to most recently, you and I tag team because of a similar situation. For those who are listening, back in 2019, wow, the pandemic is like wiped years away.
That's right.
2019, Ralph Lauren, their European entity, produced a pair of pants that had the Phi Beta Sigma letters on it. And that's a no-no. That's trademark. That's our own thing. And so we had to go after the organization. And instead of a traditional lawsuit, we figure, how can we make this a cultural moment? How can
Mhm.
we make this an impact for the organization where we both win and we can signal you don't have to go through the traditional routes to make something happen? So long story short, we partnered with Ralph Lauren on some jobs, some internships, leadership development, community town halls with HBCUs and PWIs, historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly white institutions, sponsoring our youth group. It was a huge partnership. And then they also sponsored billboards in Times Square and Sunset Boulevard in LA, promoting our youth auxiliary, saying "Stop the violence." And so it was a huge cultural opportunity between an iconic brand such as Ralph Lauren and an iconic organization like Phi Beta Sigma. So we had a conversation with the executive vice presidents, all of their senior leadership, and I was able to bring my people in to talk about the culture and be unapologetic. And so I had Marcus as one of the people that came in because he got this. And as I was reading your book and you talked about the situation with farmland and Supreme, I was like, we've been down this path
That's right.
before. If you want to share briefly with everyone kind of what that moment looked like and what it meant for you in your career.
Yeah. So Supreme, we know, is a New York City streetwear brand that is, I mean, it's the biggest streetwear brand in the world, full stop. But my client, Farmland, people don't know very much at all. Like, they're a pork manufacturer from Kansas City, where they were my client. And and as the agency for Farmland, we're just trying to build some relevancy, build some awareness, so people will be more inclined to buy when they're at the grocery store. And what we realized, one of my teammates realized, is that Supreme had stolen the logo of Farmland and put it on their new drop, like on their hats and and it's like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Like, that is IP infringement. And to your point, Kevin, what most people would do is say, let's litigate this.
Yeah.
But the thing about Supreme, though, is that they are historically known for stealing people's IP. So much so that I mean, they are like Teflon. Like, they never stick. Somehow or another, the lawsuits just roll off their back and they just keep on running. In fact,
I can't figure it out.
their
I can't figure
actual
that out.
logo, their Supreme logo, was stolen by Barbara Kruger, an artist. And that's just, they just don't care. They're irreverent about it. And that's sort of the ethos of the brand, this
Yeah.
irreverence that they have. So when we talk to the client first, like, well, let's get our lawyers involved. It's like, listen, that's not going to work. This is not going to work. They don't care about that. It's like, well, should we like just ignore it then? They go, no, don't ignore it. Are you kidding me? You're missing out on an opportunity. So we thought to ourselves, let's engage, because most people don't do that. And this might be an opportunity for us as a brand, Farmland, to realize some of the marketing objectives that we've been trying to do through traditional marketing communications. So we responded to Farmland after they, responded to Supreme after their drop and said, hey, your drop looks dope. You know, we must have missed out on the memo. Could we get a few of those hats? And they never responded. Supreme never responded, but the entire Hypebeast community was like, yo, Supreme just got served. And we're like, okay, we think we're onto something here. So the next step we did, when Supreme dropped their next launch, their next drop, we dropped a lookbook that took all of our farmers from Farmland in their natural habitat on the farm, decked out in the hottest Supreme gear, like the most coveted, expensive Supreme gear. We had our farmers in a lookbook donning the Supreme look. And then we posted across the social web, and it just crushed. I mean, it did so well as far as PR, so well as far as awareness, as far as actual sales conversion. And what's the point of all this? The point of all this is that these opportunities that present themselves, you can look at it through a traditional lens, to your point, Kevin, or you can find the cultural angle that actually provides far more benefit than you know. And that's the power of culture. I mean, culture is the governing operating system of humanity. It's the system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and what people like us do. And when you could tap into these cultural characteristics that govern people, then people not only consume your brand, your product, your point of view, your politics, they tell other people like themselves, and begins to propagate across these communities in ways that your marketing communication could never do by itself.
And along those lines, what another thing that stood out in your book, when you think about those cultural movements and opportunities, was the Brooklyn Nets. And knowing how diehard New Yorkers are from their boroughs, how hard they go. And when you think about the idea of moving a competitor into the space of a storied organization such as the Knicks, your story on how that all happened, and you tapped into the pride of the people of Brooklyn. And it reminded me of, I don't have my head in here, but it reminded me a lot of Detroiters with the old English D. Can you talk a little bit about the Brooklyn Nets campaign, and just
Yeah.
how you all figured we can't just pop up, we have to do something, we have to activate the people?
So the brief that we were given was that the New Jersey Nets are now moving to Brooklyn to become the Brooklyn Nets. And the CEO, Brett Yarmark, said to us, I want the Brooklyn Nets to be to Brooklyn what the Knicks are to Manhattan. We go, what? Like, what? Like, that brief seems impossible. But then when you start to layer on top of all the other variables, you go, there's no way we can solve this thing. Because not only are we encroaching on the Knicks space, but also you're taking an export from New Jersey into New York, and New Yorkers hate New Jersey, like hate New Jersey. There's only a few things they accept, like, I don't know, Bon Jovi, maybe, right? And Bruce Springsteen. That's about it, right? They don't rock with New Jersey at all. So then you got that thing. Then the other issue was that they were building the Barclays Center. This is the arena the Nets would play in Brooklyn, in this very historic area of Brooklyn known as Atlantic Terminal. And they were going to uproot a lot of local businesses and a lot of local residents. And people were hot. They were not happy, and rightfully so. I mean, there were boycotts and protests about this building being built. So you got protests, you've got this inherent disdain for anything New Jersey-esque, and then you've got this built-in pride that people have about the Knicks, and you're bringing over a team that sucks. I mean, the New Jersey Nets had never won a championship. The closest they got was a finals appearance when they got swept. I mean, there's nothing good happening here. None of the value propositions were benefiting us. So we said, okay, well, this isn't going to work looking at this through a traditional lens. Let's look at it through a cultural lens, like the people. And what do we know about the people of Brooklyn? That they are the most proud borough ever. Like that idea of, is Brooklyn in a house? Like that's a real thing. Brooklynites love the fact that they're from Brooklyn. So we said, well, let's stoke some Brooklyn pride then. Well, how might we do that? Well, let's borrow a page from Edward Bernays, who's the godfather of propaganda. And Edward Bernays has this theory that you can unite a people by declaring an enemy of the state. You bring people together by saying those are our enemies. And we see this in politics all the time, right? You bring people together by saying those people are not us, and therefore people come together. So the idea was, let's declare an enemy such that Brooklynites will come together and use the Brooklyn Nets as a way of signaling their identity. And luckily for us, there was an inherent enemy of the state for Brooklyn, and that's Manhattan. Now, if there's anybody on this call or maybe listen to this who live in Brooklyn or from Brooklyn, you know the pain. Like, you live in Brooklyn, got to schlep to Manhattan to work and then schlep back. It's a hassle, right? And that sort of tension that exists there, that creates a really good demarcation by way of saying that I'm a Brooklynite. I live in New York City, I work in Manhattan, but I'm a Brooklynite. And we used that truth, those truths, as a way to inform the marketing communication that will get Brooklynites buying Brooklynets gear and ultimately becoming fans. And as the book sort of illustrates, we did that in very simple ways. Like, we used billboards, and this thing was trending nationally just using local media. But the idea was that people who are from Brooklyn, who are Brooklynites, they started using our marketing communications not as ways to communicate the product, but as cultural production to communicate themselves. And I think in the first 2 weeks, that when merch went on sale in June of 2012, so this is months before the team even touches the floor, in the fall, we went from being number 28 in merch sales to number 4 in merch sales for NBA teams. Unbelievable. The team hasn't even played a game yet, but people were buying Brooklyn Nets gear as a way of signaling to the world, as a receipt of identity, that I'm a Brooklynite and I rep Brooklyn. And that, to me, that is the biggest takeaway for anyone that manages a brand, that runs an organization, that shepherds an institution. That if you're trying to get people to move, get people to adopt behavior, don't focus on the value propositions of what you do. Focus on why you do it. Focus on the thing that's anchored in identity. And people who see the world similarly, they'll use your brand, they'll use your institution, your organization, your entity, not because of what it is, but because of who they are. And the better we understand them, the more likely we are to get people to move. And I think that's super powerful.
And I think that there, in addition to the tactics that you mentioned, the billboards and the kind of social media campaign, it seemed like it was well sequenced. There was some teasers before. It was like, we don't know what we're talking about, what these people are talking about, but there's this new hashtag and we got celebrities talking about it. But then there was that marriage from the beginning with hip hop culture, because you
Oh,
had
yeah.
Jay-Z as a minority owner, but what he signaled to the community, that was, connected it with this new team. And, this dope colors, it was black and white. It reminds me of the 90s of, the LA Kings and, the White Sox gear that a lot of the rappers wore. That was like, it's plain, it's simple. And it became like, it's like the cool villain.
That's
And
right.
I
It's
think that's what
gritty.
the way it's signaled with Brooklyn. It was like, we're the cool villains. We got this, these dark colors, but it's while it seemed at odds with the community, because of what needed to happen to get it there, it seemed very organic and rooted in the community once it finally got there. I don't know how y'all did that. It it seems like such a humongous feat for Brooklyn. Like, that's a hard group.
You know what I realize is that, yeah, when you look at it from the outside, you go, this is a tough nut to crack. But everyone has a soft spot.
Yeah.
Like every group has a soft spot. And you're right, like, using black and white, that was the first team in the NBA to have a black and white colorway. That took a lot of time to get approval from the NBA. And we wanted that because it felt Brooklyn. It felt gritty. It felt real. I mean, any creative undertaking we did, our mood board was essentially the 99 Problems video from Jay-Z. It was that, like, that's Brooklyn. And you superimpose that on what was happening at the time. Brooklyn was sort of just starting to feel this like massive gentrification.
Yeah.
Right. Where like the grit of Brooklyn was being kind of washed off and sort of being polished. Right. So kind of giving some homage to what Brooklyn once was and kind of stood for those Brooklynites. I think it went a long way. And orchestrating it was a challenge. And actually, I'll let you in on it. I don't think I added this in the book. I know I didn't add this in the book. We had an idea that was going to be really killer, and it didn't work out. We were going to we had a script that we had Spike Lee and Jay-Z were going to bump into each other at a coffee shop. And then Jay was going to be wearing a Brooklyn Nets hat and Spike Lee would be wearing Knicks. And Jay was going to be like, so it begins. And then Spike was like, so it begins. And that was going to be sort of the way to make the rivalry feel like a thing. My understanding is that Spike was into it, but Jay was like, nah, I'm good. It's like, Jay, come on, it's gonna be the thing. Which is odd because Jay, he was affiliated with Translation. But anyway, I think this worked out a lot better, even though that script would have been killer. This worked out a lot better because it felt like though it was designed, it didn't feel orchestrated. Though we designed it so that the dominoes will sort of fall in such a way that would lead to this outcome that we were all desiring. It felt, though, that it was co-created by the people, and that's exactly what we wanted.
As you're talking about this, and as I was reading about the Brooklyn campaign, it really just stood out to me because it just reminds me of Detroit, the pride the Detroiters have in our emblems, our emblem, the one that we rock everywhere we go to signal that we're not from here. There's a certain blue collarness that comes with it, a certain grit and hustle. And it made me think of Tommy Walker's Detroit versus Everybody brand, and that became like the mantra because that's the way it felt. And so reading the book and just thinking about it, like it feels like this whole kind of campaign, it feels natural. It becomes that identifier of who we are, and it embodies the mentality and perspective that we have. So kudos to getting that off. That seemed like an impossible thing. When you got the right people and a good budget, you can make some good things happen.
And here's the thing, the budget wasn't even big at all. It was actually a really modest budget, really, really modest. And so because the budget was so modest, the timeline was so tight, and the deadline was what it was. Like the team's going to launch regardless of what we did. The stakes were really high, and I felt very convicted about what we're doing because I believe in the science. Right? I believe in the science of humanity. If we understand people, then people will behave in a way that is more predictable than not because of how predictable we are.
So I have a couple other things before I open it up. Hopefully we have some questions from folks that may want to, ask some questions or get some thoughts. But, while we're on that topic of authentic and genuine community alignment with culture, we can't have this conversation without the inverse. And I'm always thinking about home. Detroit's been like the whooping bag or whatever you want to call it for a very long time. And thinking about your book and your example of Shinola, and how the company used played on where we were coming out of bankruptcy or going into bankruptcy and coming out of bankruptcy as a city. And I thought you did a brilliant job touching on that in the book, kind of under the vein of cultural appropriation. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So like Shinola, Shinola has done a good job of leveraging all the brand effects that are associated with the city to help propel its brand.
Yeah.
right? So much so that they have Detroit on the actual product, right? Shinola Detroit on the actual product. And while the brand is benefiting from, or the brand was benefiting from the mythology of the city, I don't know how much the city was benefiting from the mythology of the
Yeah.
brand. And that becomes problematic. And as I look closer to that, you go, oh man, like you can't conquest the cultural marks of a group of people and not contribute back to it. You just cannot do that. Like that is irresponsible. And I would say it's immoral.
Mhm.
And I thought that Shinola made for a good case, because I think there is some good that Shinola does, but if they spend more of their efforts focusing on their contribution back into the culture as opposed to what they take from the culture, Shinola can be actually a really interesting sort of bedrock, pardon the pun, to the city of Detroit, right?
Yeah.
Having the Shinola Hotel actually does well for the city, right?
Yeah.
It does well for the city. Now the question becomes, who's running the Shinola Hotel? Who's working the Shinola Hotel?
Yeah.
Like, where is the economic benefit to the people who bore the burden to provide the mythology that is the city of Detroit? Like there has to be a better exchange happening there. And while the Shinola that we knew 5 years ago is not the Shinola we know today because it's under new leadership. And I'm actually, I don't have any problem saying it. I've been talking to the CEO of Shinola because
Mhm.
he's read the book and he goes, "You got some big opinions about the brand." I'm like, "Well, because I think you can do more and you can
Yeah.
be better, and I would love to help you do that very thing." I think that's the role that we have to play, and make that argument in the book that you can't learn these things that I teach in the book and then say, "Great, now I'm going to just do it for my betterment." And I
Yeah.
say that with great power comes great responsibility, as uh, Ben Parker puts it. But more importantly, that because we now have a responsibility, your responsibility isn't just to yourself, it's to the community in which you are benefiting from,
Mhm.
right? So if it's your consumers, they're not machines who eat messages and crap cash. They are human beings that live inside of a community. So as you are entering exchange with them when they're buying your stuff, you have to also ensure that the community in which they reside are benefiting from that exchange as well. I think that's been my biggest learning from writing the book. It's just widened my aperture about the world. That when I go back and look at the Brooklynettes, I often refer to it as one of the things I'm most proud of because of how effective it was, but it's also one of my favorite case studies because I'm still learning from it.
Yeah.
That while the brand has done so very well and it's been so very successful, um, we did a disservice to the borough of Brooklyn. We did. Like, we uprooted people. We dislocated city, small businesses. And in all of my marketing brilliance, I say big air quotes, of course, I didn't think about that at all. And that becomes a constant reminder of me today as a practitioner that we need to be thinking about not just the company, not just the consumer, but the community in which they reside as well.
My final thought, and then I'm gonna let everyone unmute themselves. We got a few questions popping up. I'd love to have you all ask your questions.
Yeah, sweet.
But to your point, just kind of talking about that corporate social responsibility piece. It's a buzzword that we hear sometimes, but then there's that responsibility to the brand. And as the younger generations come up, their expectation for brands is much different. They expect it that the brand to act as a being, as a responsible party in the community, that has a voice, that has a soul, that understands empathy, and isn't just about profit. And so that's where the younger generations are spending their money. It's with these companies, and it's not the tenure anymore. It's who can get my money right now, because we know
Yeah.
it's going to change and they will move around. And so the benefit, or um, the benefit goes to the companies that can embrace that and understand that they aren't just a corporate entity, but they are a being of the community, and they have to be of the people and for the people. And the people that work for them are expecting them to align with their personal beliefs and morals. So
That's right, because brands are asking for more from their consumers. I want you to use me as an identity project, not just because of the value propositions of the product. I want you to stay loyal to me forever. Like, I want more from you. So of course, consumers are going to want more from the brand.
Christopher Jones, if you don't mind, brother Christopher Jones, you mind unmuting and asking your question there? Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, Brother Collins. I work as a visual communications manager for a local nonprofit in Atlanta, and I have the task of developing brand guidelines for my organization. And so my question is there a tactic or question that's been helpful for you in moving stakeholders from a culture of everyone doing whatever they want to one of accountability and shared purpose?
Yeah. What's up, Brother Jones? Good to hear from you. So I always start with the brand guidelines are, especially the visual brand guidelines, are the manifestation or the external manifestation of internal beliefs, right? They're outward expressions of inward beliefs. So I think it starts with, like, what does the organization believe? How does it see the world? Like, what are the cultural characteristics of the organization, i.e., who are we, our identity? What are the beliefs and ideologies that we hold, like the truths that we hold about the world and the stories we tell ourselves about the world because of those truths? And then how do we manifest it in the way that we show up in the world? Artifacts, that's the iconography part, right? The behaviors, these are the social norms, the unwritten rules. And then the language, like, what is the vernacular that is that are signals of who we are? And then what are the cultural productions that express who we are, but also reflect who we are, right? So the alchemy of those systems of systems is our culture. So we got to start first with who are we and what are our cultural characteristics? And then we go, okay, if this is who we are, everything that we do should be a demonstrable representation of that. So if we believe, so say for instance, take the frat, we believe a culture for service is service for humanity, right? That's what we believe. So when we are evaluating our calendar, we go, where's the service in this? Right? I mean, I remember in undergrad, we always do that. We're like 80% of what we do has to be service oriented. We can't just be partying and stepping, right? Like, where's the service? Where's the service? Where's the service? Right? And it's because of our ideology that we had those sort of the sort of programming. And the same thing goes with your nonprofit, that to get everybody on the board, everyone has to be on board. Everyone has to believe. If they don't believe, then they're in the wrong place, right? And that goes to Kevin's earlier point about me finding my way professionally, that I worked in amazing places. Good. I mean, like, I'm so grateful to work at Apple. Are you kidding me? Like, I love Apple. I'm an Apple devotee, right? And I'm a huge Beyonce fan, right? Especially as a human being. But I found my footing. I found my place at translation because I found myself with people who saw the world similarly. And that's how it needs to be with the nonprofit, right? Who are we? What do we believe? And are the people around the table, people believe the same thing? If not, you probably got the wrong people around the table.
Yep. That's all I'll say. I agree with that last part specifically. Thank you, Brother Jones. Brother Crawford has a couple questions here.
Just one question. First of all, brother Collins, congratulations on the book. Just ordered my copy.
Appreciate you, Doc.
Based on the discussion today, absolutely. So I don't work in advertising or marketing. I work in higher education. I see that several of us on this call in higher ed, certainly working at predominantly white spaces, institutions. I've been around the table with enrollment management folks and marketing folks, and we're talking about how are we going to attract more diverse applicants and X, Y, and Z. And we want to do this. And oftentimes I'm the only one who looks like me at that table. And I got to say sometimes, nah, bro, that ain't it. You're way off. So, and you, pardon me if you've addressed this in your book already. I haven't read it yet, but have you been in those places and those spaces where you've had to say, it's for the culture? And how did you address it? Can you give us an example? Tell us how it went down.
Oh yeah, Brother Crawford, absolutely. So I'm a professor at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, in the marketing department, right? So I'm in higher ed too, and at a PWI. I'm totally with you. And as you know, in academia, there's only 2.8% of professors are Black. And then I'm also in advertising, and there are only 4.8% of Black people in the entire industry, right? So I feel like I'm always at a table where I'm one of few or one of one. But I will say, so yes, that is a stark fact that adds color to everything we're talking about. But to your other point, I think what I will say is that I found myself at tables where I've been offended and I've been surprised in good ways, where that there's people who saw a point of view that I had, even though they're not from where I am or not from where I'm from. And I go, oh, word up. And immediately I feel like you're one of us. Like I feel connected, right? And that's what culture does. Like when we see the world similarly, we go, oh man, you love Frank Ocean, I love Frank Ocean too. Best friends is what we're going to be. And in those conversations, I've heard people speak about a perspective that they don't own, but they see the world through someone else's lenses. And that's what we're trying, that's what we need to get people to this idea of empathy, right? Self-aware perspective taking. And I talk about this in the book, that the irony of this is that we live in a world where we have more information about people than ever before, like just reams and reams and reams and reams of data about people. And we end up relying on the data to make decisions. But the challenge is that even though we make those decisions based on the data, we still fall short. Even in academia, we go, why is this happening? It's because we mistake information for intimacy. Mm-hmm. And the only way that we really understand the perspective of other people is to have intimate proximity to them and how they see the world. So when we're the one of few or the one of one, we are evangelizing a point of view that people in the room don't have. And we go, hey, listen, like your intention is well suited, right? I see no malicious in what you're trying to do. Maliciousness is what you're trying to do. However, you're missing the perspective of people that are not yourself. And let me encourage you by enlightening you on what reality is. And the hope is that people around the room are curious enough to go, oh, enlighten me, help me see differently, right? And if you are in a room where people refuse to see the world in ways that aren't their own, you get to ask yourself, are you in the right room? It's interesting, and I don't want to go on a tangent here, but like, I just read an article about Florida is experiencing a brain drain in academia. Like professors are leaving Florida institutions because of the ideologies that are driving academia from primary, secondary to higher ed. And they go, this isn't the right place for me. Yeah. And that's how we legitimate. We legitimate with our figurative vote, i.e. our time, our money, our effort, our intelligence, and our literal votes. So, Brother Crawford, if you find yourself at a table where you're always evangelizing a point of view that no one understands and no one has enough curiosity to understand it, then ask yourself, are you at the right table?
Thanks a lot, brother.
You got it.
That's something, what you just said is something that when I talk to folks around kind of career coaching or leadership development, it's the culture piece. When you find yourself at odds and bumping heads with folks and you feel like it's just not working, it's time to go.
Right.
You cannot be culture. You cannot be an organizational culture. And, like the saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I can be the most most well-intentioned person, but I cannot be the culture of an organization. Find your exit plan, work it out. You deserve to be somewhere where the culture matches yours. May have time for maybe one more question. Either Brother Wilson or Brother Clay, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Brother Crawford actually hit on my question a little bit, but to expand a little bit, Brother Collins, first of all, congratulations on the book. So good to see you, hear from you. I haven't seen you since 1998 at the Sigma Plaza, and that's a long, long time.
Ooh.
Yeah, and in a different compromising situation. But
Yes,
God bless you.
Yes,
I just wanted to share that I work in higher education, cabinet member, chief diversity officer. A lot of my friends and colleagues are chief diversity officers, chief strategy officers, innovation officers, C-suite and businesses. I always put in spaces in regards to organizations or entities wants to change their culture because their brand have went left. And so the question I always pose in those spaces where are culture and brand interchangeable or one and the same, or does one inform the other? And if one doesn't inform the other, how do you shift it, or do you have to recreate the culture to inform a new brand? And so I'm just trying to understand from that perspective how to create the change that is desired.
Yeah. Oh, man, that's a great question. So I would say that culture and brand are incestuous, and here's why. So what is a brand? Right? The literature tells us that a brand is an identifiable signifier that conjures up thoughts and feelings in the minds and hearts of people in relationship to a product, institution, organization, entity, or a person, right? It's a signifier that conjures up affects and cognitions, right? But what is a signifier? Meaning. It means something. It's a vessel of meaning. And what constitutes meaning? Culture. Culture is a realized meaning-making system, right? For some, a cow is leather. For others, it's a deity. And for some, it's dinner. Which one is it? It's all three, depending on who you are, right? So when we talk about brand, these vessels of meaning, they are negotiated and interpreted through cultural lenses, right? So for some, they may look at Make America Great hat and go, that's bigotry. Where others may see it and go, that's home, right? Well, which one is it? Well, it's both of them. So when you talk about a company who's like, we want to change the culture of our brand, I'd say that those two things have to happen at the same time. They're levers that you got to pull at the same time. Because if we want our brand to have new meaning, then we have to show up in the world differently. If we want our brand to signify something different, then that signifier has to be present in the beliefs that we hold, the artifacts that we don, the behaviors that are normative, and the language that we use, right? Because if our culture, that is this vessel of meaning that we are stewarding, if the way that we present it to the world is out of sync with the meaning that we want it to signal, then people are going to be like, nah, we don't believe you. You need more people. They're like, nah, those things do not add up. You say this, but you do this. No. I'm not buying it. And it's because that incongruence, that culture and brand can never be divorced. It can never be untethered. So as you think about as from a DEI perspective, from like a CEO perspective, a CMO perspective, director perspective, anyone with the leadership role in any institution, they're trying to shepherd the brand in one direction in hopes that the culture will then move. I'd say nothing's impossible, but it's pretty impossible. The idea is to say, let's change the way that we see the world first. If we change our ideology, the way by which we make meaning of the world, then we'll see that, okay, our behaviors, our actions, our hiring practices, how we communicate, what we do, what we don't do, how we talk, how we adorn ourselves, all these things become outputs of who we are. And then the brand as a natural consequence will then be a manifestation of those cultural inputs.
Wow, thanks. That was perfect.
You got it, my brother.
All right, everyone. We are just a couple minutes over, but I didn't want to stop the conversation. We had some great questions here, but I do want to be mindful of everybody's time. It is Saturday. That's prime time. Saturday in the summertime at that. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time and exercise a little bit of time value on the back half. But I definitely want to thank everybody for joining us today, taking time out. Thank you, Brother Collins, for taking time out of your very busy schedule as you're on your kind of tour promoting the book, but talking to not only members of Phi Beta Sigma, but the public that we've invited in here today. Great book. I'm slightly biased because I've known you for so long, but as a brand and culture practitioner, I found my people, I found my book, and I recommend folks check it out. It's an easy read. I read it in 2 evenings if you're a speed reader. If you have any questions, I'm pretty sure you can reach out to Marcus on LinkedIn. He's pretty active on all of the different socials. And check out his Check the Rhyme series that he has, where he decodes lyrics and hip hop from a marketing and cultural perspective. So it's always good to see people from Detroit doing well, people from people in the fraternity doing well, giving back and being a credit to their industry. So again, thank you, Brother Collins, for your time today.
I appreciate it, Fry. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all the brothers, whether you're in the Fred or not, the inclusive we and the exclusive we. for joining. And if I can be of any service at all, like you reach out to me on LinkedIn, it just put, 1914, and I'll respond right away.
All right, everyone. Enjoy your day. Talk to you soon.
Go mob.